All right, so one of the most unique motoring experiences I've ever had personally was back when I was daily driving a Tesla. I got to drive and borrow the original, the Tesla Roadster from 2008, and got to really feel the beginning and the experience of what original electric sports car was supposed to be. And then obviously see the evolution that happened since then. Now, I'm daily driving a 911, and the question I may have had is, what would an equivalent throwback experience be? And this one, it's actually not exactly what it looks like, because you're probably thinking, oh, you're gonna drive a manual OG turbo? That's a crazy car to drive. No. This one's electric. So for the past couple days, Miles and I have had a real treat driving around this thing. This is a sort of remodeled 964 generation Porsche 911 to be fully electric by a company called Sacrilegious Motors. Probably appropriately named, because there's plenty of people who see this and see electric and that feels sacrilegious. But then you see the reviews and what people have thought about driving this thing, and it seems like they've done an incredible job. So I just wanted to check it out and see how this actually drove. And it turns out it's an incredible combination of the manual original feel with this obviously new powertrain being, well, I'll say it, better than the original. Now, if you go back and watch that original Living with the 2008 Tesla Roadster video, you'll see, it's quite a throwback from the Teslas of today. The screens are much smaller, the car is much smaller, the battery is much smaller, and everything is just further behind. It's more analog, but not completely. This generation car first came out in the 80s, is a 1989 model, and so there were no screens. This is even more of a throwback. And so you might think living with it would be crazy, and then taking one of these rare cars and going through the work of turning it into an electric car is just a crazy idea. But after I've lived with it now, I actually get why people do it. And there may be some surprises in my experience that I'll share with you now. So let's just jump right in. So first of all, gorgeous car. I might be biased because I chose a car that's inspired heavily by this, and I actually have a black one too, but you can see this is the wide body one, and it's a convertible as well, so a cabriolet if you want to call it that. And the thing to note here that's kind of interesting is there's a lot of parts here that are shared from the original Porsche parts, but also a lot of new parts. Like you can see these wheels here. You also see these new Brembo brakes that barely fit underneath the wheels, but they get in there. Pilot Sport tires that barely fit under the fenders. And these are some big wide tires back here too. Matter of fact, what can I see? These are 295 section 18-inch rims. These are some juicy tires back here for the amount of power this thing puts out, which is 500 horsepower and 500 Newton meters. Now, it's electric, so a lot of the cars built today have the batteries in like this little skateboard underneath the car. But where's the battery in here? There's actually two. Big one in the front and big one in the back. So on the off chance that you're doing a road trip or something in this car, you do have a little bit of front trunk space, not a huge amount, but enough for an adapter, maybe a bag, a carry-on size bag or so, but that's half the battery right there below that carpeting. Also your adjustable dampers, and I think that's your windshield wiper fluid. So there's where half the weight goes. So behind this iconic ducktail where the old power plant used to be, there's the other half of the battery. And of course your dampers as well, but that is a whole bunch of weight. So now you can see it's kind of evenly distributed. There's no more storage in here, but there's half the battery in the front, half the battery in the back. And in total, that's gonna get you around 200 miles of range on a single charge if you drive it like normal, which is actually kind of impressive because of how small this car really is. You don't expect a whole bunch of space to put battery in. But since the battery's not on the floor, that means the driving position and all of this interior is closer than ever to the original. These are new seats, but then of course when I get in here, you're gonna see a whole bunch of original Porsche. So I remember when I made that video on the refreshed Volkswagen bus, the electric one, the ID Buzz. there was a lot of comments that were like, this is kind of cool, I guess, but I wish they just took the exact old retro design and they just made that one electric. And I totally get it now, because that's basically what this car is. I am surrounded by analog parts, not a single screen in sight. Well, actually, they've given me a little tiny screen here for CarPlay, and it barely counts as a screen because this is added extra. But when you're driving, you're focused here on this wheel and on this beautiful interior, which is basically just your gauges. Now, you saw that key from before. This is the way to turn the car on. Stick the key right in there, turn it, and you see these gauges spin up. So the gauges are, of course, updated a bit to work with the electric nature of this car. So it's telling me my battery level. It's also going to tell me which drive mode I'm in, how much power I'm using. Great sound. You can see how much range I have left. I'm in chill mode right now, and over there is my speed. So this is an updated gauge cluster, but very much analog. You've got your parking brake down here. This is, I'll put foot on the brake, reverse, drive, neutral. And they've actually added a MagSafe puck with power just to charge your MagSafe devices. So if you do want CarPlay, if you do want to put your iPhone there, that is a nice little touch that they've added. Even though the entire rest of this car is super retro, you can have your brand new phone charging right there where it belongs. But yeah, oh my God, every single little thing happening here is such a throwback. The air conditioning, these notches here for cooling and heating, for where the air comes out. Obviously all manual vents. We're not doing any screens for that type of stuff. And of course you have your lock here. And the way you open the door is just this little thing right here. This is sick. I'm loving it. Now there's a couple other buttons over here that you do want to know about, specifically this one with an exclamation point on it, which switches the car from chill mode. Hold on, it says crank me because it wants me to fully turn it on. From chill mode to sport mode. And the thing about these cars is they are so kind of custom and like one-off built that, you know, there is chill mode, which is more regen, 65% regen, and 2/3, 3/4 of the power, but they can tailor it when they build you the car to be exactly the way you want. Sport mode has less regen, closer to 20% regen, but is giving you all of the power. Again, all of that can be customized, but it's just crazy to me to sit in a car like this, knowing that cars used to be so small that you could reach over and just touch the other side without fully extending your arm. Cars used to be so much smaller, so much thinner. There's no airbag in this car, but you've got your windshield wipers here, you've got your blinkers over here. Things are all still in the familiar places, but it's just such a throwback. It's so sick. This is a one-of-a-kind experience. You also have your back seats. Don't forget about those. My car has the same thing, barely usable. You don't want an adult back there, but you could do it if you want to. But I'm gonna pass it to Miles for the driving experience, because I've shown you the interior, I've shown you the basics. You get 200 miles of driving, so Miles, what's it like to drive?
The brand of this car is Sacrilegious Motors, because the idea to a lot of OG Porsche enthusiasts that someone would take a car like this and put electric motors inside is kind of crazy, right? And I think there's this big problem with the car community where people think it just has to be one or the other for certain types of vehicles. People are upset that the new Ferrari hypercar has a V6 instead of a V12. But if you can afford that car, what's stopping you from owning 12 other cars with a V12? You should look at this car the same way. If you have nearly $800,000 or more to spend on a car like this, what's also stopping you from spending the equivalent money on a classic ICE Porsche 911? And so with all that in mind, I think it's important that we don't try to compare this to an ICE 911, because if you can afford this car, you can also just get an internal combustion engine 964. But what I will say is that what they've done an amazing job at with this car is making sure the only thing that doesn't feel like a 911 is the fact that you have electric motors for the drivetrain. Literally every other aspect of driving this car, even down to the smells, is definitely what you would experience with a classic Porsche 911. The steering feel, it's nice, weighted, connected, super communicative, takes a bit of elbow work to get it going, just like a classic Porsche from the 90s, 80s. It's obviously super low to the ground. It's very stiff because of those three-way adjustable coilovers that we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the lightness. This car only weighs just barely over 3,000 pounds, which makes this lighter than most gas-powered cars currently on sale today. We also still have the 40-60 weight distribution of a traditional 911. So weight transfer, general balance, and handling, it's all on par with the original car. But then, of course, you've got 500 horsepower, just a little over 500 newton meters of torque. I'll put the conversion here to pound-feet. And so 3,000 pounds, 500 horsepower, and rear-wheel drive only. This thing is quick, and it's quite frankly a little scary at times, just because of how small it is. It certainly has that OG car feel, just like other cars we've had on the channel this year, like the Volkswagen ID Buzz. Older cars like that really make you feel like, yeah, if you screw up in this thing, there's not a lot that's gonna save you. But that's a part of the fun with cars like these older Porsches, these older purpose-built sports cars. The lack of safety, in a sense, is almost what adds to the thrill of the experience. And so in this car, there are zero nannies. You have no traction control system, so you turn the wheel to the left and floor it, and you are going sideways. The suspension on this car is actually really interesting. Firstly, I'm sure you've noticed in this footage that it is pretty stiff. It sits very low, and so you're gonna feel a lot of those bumps, but it's certainly livable depending on who you are, I guess, and the area you live in. I live in New Jersey, so obviously ride comfort is going to always not be the best compared to other places. But it is adjustable, and that's because these are three-way adjustable coilovers made by Penske Racing. And they're known for making setups for, like, you know, supercars, sports cars. And so what this setup is very similar to something that you'd get in like a GT3 RS, for example. One of the killer parts of this setup is having remote reservoirs that you can see by opening the rear hatch of the car. And so you have these remote reservoirs that are connected to the primary fluid tank underneath the car via these hydraulic lines that are feeding fluid back and forth. And so the benefits you're getting is, firstly, maintenance. It's easier to access those reservoirs by just popping open the rear hatch. But then secondly, you're getting easy adjustability by just opening the rear hatch and adjusting the knobs connected to the reservoir, which makes it super easy to tailor your driving experience to whatever scenario you're in. This is not necessarily designed to be a super high performance track vehicle, but because of this setup and the weight and the power, you certainly could take this to a track day and probably embarrass a lot of folks. And so overall, you're working with ride comfort that's not only better than what you would get from an original 964, but more adjustable and more capable as well. You're also working with a very healthy brake setup in this car. You've got 6 piston calipers up front, 4 piston calipers in the rear, big steel Brembo rotors all around. And so a setup like that is what you'd find on a lot of like high-end supercars from like the past 10 years or so. But the braking modulation is also really nice. It's not super grabby and stabby like a lot of sports cars are known to be. It's very smooth and gradual, which makes it a lot easier to live with as a daily driver if that's something you wanted to attempt to do. So like I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think it makes sense to try to compare this as an alternative to the equivalent 911 from this era. But even with that in mind, I do think we should evaluate the fun factor versus a 911 of this era, not powered by electric motors and a battery. I think it really depends on who you are. For some people, not having that noise is just not going to do anything for you, no matter how scary and how capable the car is overall. To me, this is something I think I would love to buy for someone who wants the feeling of driving a 911 without having to deal with all of the maintenance responsibilities that come with maintaining a 911 from this era. You know, when getting a car like this, you're not going to have to deal with that sort of stuff. And I think it's also an interesting challenge to try to learn and understand a car with this type of instantaneous power delivery without any of the electronic traction control assists and all that fun stuff. It's certainly different than learning to understand a manual transmission 993 turbo where you have to properly time shifts and throttle input with, you know, the boost of the turbos if you have a turbocharged 911, that sort of stuff. It's certainly an entirely different experience, one that you can't just compare directly to an internal combustion engine powered 911. I think it's pretty hard to not have fun in a car like this, even if you would prefer having, you know, an 8,000 RPM, high revving, you know, manual transmission experience. This is not a replacement for that, but if you have a budget that allows for it, I think it's a pretty cool addition. And it's something that I think a lot of people are going to be naturally very skeptical about. But I think it's only right that you give it a try before ruling it out. When you have all these things, when you have the Porsche media center, you have the Porsche steering feel, you have the Porsche smell, it smells like a lot of my Uncle Jim's old Porsches. Like, it's actually crazy. When you put all that into consideration, you can understand how you can get to an extremely high price point, because these are hand-built machines. These are not Tesla Model 3s where, you know, you'll see weird gaps here and there and weird quirky inconsistencies. This has that real OG German car feel, which is, you know, it's hard to put a price on that for some people.
I think I love this thing. I think I love this thing. This might be my favorite car that we've actually gotten to test here. And it's part the car, part the experience. Again, I keep throwing back to that 2008 Tesla Roadster video, how far the technology has come since the original Tesla Roadster, the battery density, how much range you get, how fast they charge. I didn't even show you. I should show you one last thing before I wrap this up. How you charge this is actually kind of really intuitive. You just grab this and pull, and this opens, and there's your charge port right here, CCS. Pop it right in there. Like you would expect that to be a sort of a gas tank, but they've thought of everything. But this, I love this just project because it's just such an obviously original, OG looking car from the 80s, the classic shape. I don't think anyone's ever not liked the shape of this 911, but then it just has what I'm familiar with, which is the electric driving experience, and kind of does it really well. This is an ultimate fun car. I love it. I'll leave a link below if you want to check them out. I'll probably nobody who actually watches this is going to go buy one of these, but it's one of the sickest things ever, and I'm glad I got to experience it. Hopefully I get to try this again. All right, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.